All right, grab your coffee. We're gonna get started here. I forgot. We're gonna need Bibles today. Let me grab them. You will want a Bible for today. Imagine that, using Bibles in our Bible study. Test 1, 2, da, 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 da. Yeah. Yeah, it's doing stereo out. Okay, whatever. Okay. Hospitality. So last week we did a bit of an introduction, and we're going to do a little bit more this morning, but we are going to look at some biblical texts. One of the things that I said last week, and I want to reiterate it again, is that my desire out of this study is that when you read Scripture, you always carry with you that lens of understanding the importance of hospitality in any Scripture text, because it's not so much that we're going to look at Bible texts that set the standard for hospitality or create the ethic or the moral of hospitality. It's that the understanding of the offering of hospitality is always present anywhere in Scripture. And we're going to look at both Old Testament and New Testament texts. So my kind of goal out of this is simply to kind of give you another framework through which you read and interpret Bible stories. One of the texts that we're going to look at, and I think this is probably one of the best arguments for understanding hospitality, is Matthew 25, which is one of my favorite passages in all of Scripture, because for me, and I talked about this, I guess, last Sunday in the sermon, I think one of the things that we do that Christianity has done poorly is in the way that we have hyper-focused on kind of this goal of eternal life as the lens through which we understand all of our faith, right? And so much so that it almost becomes kind of an ends justifies the means type of emphasis on what all of this is about, which is unfortunate because so much of, especially the story of Jesus, is not about that. It's about kind of the now, okay? Matthew 25, for me, is the text. If you want to look at a text that kind of lays it out in plain language, in other words, this is the metric by which we will be judged, it's Matthew 25. Matthew 25 is the sheep and the goats, right? So it's kind of a parable in that, Jesus describes, you will be standing in a line, and one of those lines is the line of the faithful, the sheep, and the other is the line of the goats. And the metric through which you end up in one of those lines is the way in which you care for the other. And the words we focus on generally in remembering that text are, when I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. And the third one is, when I was a stranger, you welcomed me. Okay? And what's interesting about that is when we think about those first two, and it goes on, right? When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was in prison, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But the way in which we read those first two, when I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink, is we often read that through the lens of poverty and or homelessness, right? And or just hunger in general. And I'm not saying that's not a good way to read it, but that really colors the way in which we think about what Jesus is saying, is that what he is advocating, you know, as we try to interpret that into a modern perspective, is in our care and concern for example, world hunger, right? Access to fresh water. And all those are good. I don't want to take away from that. And yet, when you read that from a hospitality lens, in fact, all of those things that he's talking about are the way in which we welcome the stranger, because hospitality is the way in which you provide food and drink and shelter to those, well, the stranger, the foreigner. And the word in Greek is paroiokes. I don't know. I might not be pronouncing it. Paroiokes. And this is an important word because it pops up in today's gospel text. So today's gospel text is the road to Emmaus, okay? And if you're familiar with the story, there's a couple of disciples, not disciples of the 12, these are disciples of the extended 70, who are leaving Jerusalem, and they're on their way home, on their way, to the next, we don't know what it is. We know that the Passover has ended, and so they're returning probably from whence they came. And all of the things that is tied up in that in terms of, Jesus being killed and the consequences that has for them. And they encounter a man, Jesus, on the road away from Jerusalem on the way to Emmaus. And as they are talking to him, they are talking about the events that have happened regarding Jesus in Jerusalem. And Jesus, being a little bit, snarky might be a strong word, says, "Oh, what happened in Jerusalem?" And they say to him, "Are you the only paroikes in all of Jerusalem that has not heard of the events that happened? Are you the only stranger?" And paroikes gets translated as stranger, foreigner, or sojourner. If you're familiar with that word. So the way in which they view Jesus is not just as somebody who they don't know, but they're assuming that it's somebody from outside who's not Jewish, right? Because if you were Jewish, you would have been in Jerusalem for the Passover, and if you were in Jerusalem for the Passover, you would have heard about these events that had happened. So you must be a paroikes, you must be a foreigner, a stranger, or a sojourner. And so this colors the rest of the story, because what happens in the rest of the story is, well, they travel with this paroikes, they travel with this stranger, and eventually they sit down and have a meal together, right? And what happens then is Jesus inverts the hospitality expectation, because instead of these two disciples offering hospitality to Jesus, the stranger, prepares a meal for them. And it's in the breaking of the bread that they recognize Jesus. Were not our hearts burning within our chests, is the word that they use. So this is just kind of an example of how important it is to understand it, to have this lens of hospitality that needs to be ever present in the reading of Scripture. And it's hard to come up with a good metaphor, but it's like understanding what goes on in America and at least having a basic comprehension of the NFL, right? Of American sports. And again, a great example of this is my wife, who just doesn't get any of it, right? Being a French woman. She thinks American football is stupid. She thinks American baseball is stupid. She doesn't get any of it. Like, why do you take turns in sports? Linda.
What's even worse, because I am a football watcher,
Yeah.
is that it's trying to compare the NFL with the new
UFL, yeah.
and going, that's not the way you but
It's different rules. But just be conscious of the way in which football permeates our culture, right? I'm reading a book now by a guy named Chuck Klosterman, who was that was the book signing I went to where I met Seth, was for this. And he wrote a book that's literally just called Football. He's a pop culture writer. He's written a bunch of other stuff. But basically, it's a book that is kind of making the argument for basically describing how football permeates our culture. And I'm not a huge football fan. I don't dislike it, but it's never been a major part of my activity or personality. But it's a very fascinating read, just kind of understanding how much it has seeped into our culture, our context, right? So much so that I am always leery of scheduling things around Super Bowl Sunday, right? But from an external perspective, right, if you don't understand that piece of context in what it means to live in the United States of America, how much that permeates our context and our culture, you're going to miss out on a lot, right? You're going to miss out on a lot of our idioms, right? How many different football-related, idioms or even just terms make their way into our language? And if you're ignorant of that, you're gonna miss out on a lot of what's going on. The same holds true for hospitality. Okay, hospitality is a concept that permeates the culture of the world in which Scripture is set. If we don't understand the basics of that, we're gonna miss out on so much. So I'm reiterating my argument, Matt. Yes, it is, and that's a really important thing, is that it is not unique to Judaism or to the Hebrew people. This hospitality ethic it's the hospitality ethic of the Near East and even beyond. Because one of the things that we'll see, especially going into the New Testament, into the letters of Paul, Book of Acts, is that understanding of hospitality carries over. Now, one of the interesting things that you're gonna notice is that does not mean that there's not cultural dissonance, right? One of the kind of pivotal stories in the Acts narrative is Cornelius the centurion, right? And how those different cultural power dynamics alter that story. So, again, Cornelius is a Roman centurion who is a one of the faithful. So he's not circumcised, but he is apparently worshiping or following the Hebrew God in some manner. And he has a dream wherein Jesus appears to him, and he sends messengers to Peter, who is staying in the home of Simon the tanner. So we got Simon Peter staying with Simon the tanner. And Peter goes through this whole kind of transformation himself of figuring out whether or not Cornelius the centurion fits into the basically following of Jesus. And a lot of it has to do with hospitality and the understanding of the stranger, right? He is a cultural outsider. Wayne.
When I lived in Yemen with the Peace Corps, I admired my landlord's boombox. I had to use my Minnesota Nice to kind of get out of it and say, no. He wanted to give it to me.
It's like, I'm good, but thank you. Has anybody else encountered a similar or a like kind of a different cultural perspective on hospitality? Let me pivot to this real quick too. One of the difficulties for us as people from the United States, there are multiple. One is that nobody really passes through the United States. Okay, if you live in Europe, right? Let's say you live in France, Spain, Portugal, Hungary, wherever, you're within Schengen territory, you're within the EU, you have open borders, asterisk. And so you get people that are not just tourists, but you get people that are traveling through your country to get to another country. Describe to me a situation in which that happens here. It doesn't, right? Because if you're going, let's say, outside scenario, let's say you're going from Canada to Mexico or Mexico to Canada, you're not driving. You might be taking a pit stop in the United States in terms of flying through, but you're not going to end up in Portland, the city, right? stri- you know, conversely, one of the realities of living in Europe, and for those of you who have visited, is you can look at the license plates of cars, and that was one of my games in the first couple of times I traveled, is trying to recognize which country the license plate was from, because it's the first letter of the country, but the first letter of the country in the language that it comes from, right? So Germany is not G, it's D, because it's Deutschland, not Germany, right? And so it was fun for me playing that guessing game.
I have a friend who was born in Cuba, and during the exodus of a lot of people when Castro took
Yeah.
over, he was 17 years old, and the way he had to escape Cuba was to go to Spain.
Yeah, then immigrate to here. Yeah, not an uncommon occasion. Primarily because if you're from a country that, and again, things are very different right now. But prior to the the past 4 to 12 years. Even if you were from an undesirable country, there were avenues for you to get here. Primarily, it would mean living a year in a country where you could get residency there, and then getting a visa to come here. But, yeah.
So many people at the end of World War II, Germans that moved to South America,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Brazil, Argentina.
because it was like
Yeah.
that the landscape was familiar to them.
Yeah, and they had hope of not being extradited. Well, depending on their role in the Nazi regime. Matt.
One thing that's changed here in the U.S. When I was a young person, teenager, 20s and stuff, I lived in the Detroit area.
Yeah.
We would all the time go over to Windsor.
Yes.
And all it took was you drove up to the
Yeah.
edge of the tunnel, and the border patrol person asked you where you were born.
Yeah.
Told them, and then he said, okay.
Yeah.
And they might ask you what you're going there.
Yeah.
And you say, oh, I'm going to my friend's prom or something.
Oh, yeah.
So then we come back and they do the same thing in reverse, and that was it. No license, no passports.
That was the reality for me up through the 90s. We would go to Sault Ste. Marie. So we get to the border crossing and they say, "Where are you from?" I don't think we even showed IDs.
No.
Right? It's a bunch of 19-year-old guys. Well, drinking age was 19 in Canada. Not that we were going there.
Unless you're a woman driving by herself, because when I got to the border, they searched my car.
Did they really? Maybe they thought you were under duress. Somebody was hidden in the trunk that was, yeah.
Jesse, hospitality, and you see people hitchhiking,
Yeah.
and you always ask the question, but used to be that
Yeah.
you would pick them up and give them a lift,
Yeah.
but you just, in the 70s, that just kind of disappeared.
How many of you offered rides to hitchhikers?
My dad always did.
Yeah. Yeah. What's that, Matt?
I used to hitchhike a lot.
You did? Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a valid mode of transportation if you didn't have a vehicle. Susan.
My car broke down, and a guy came by and stopped and walked up to my car and said, "I'd be glad to give you a ride, and I'm not a serial killer."
Which is exactly what a serial killer would say. Yeah. And that's another really interesting thing to think about. And the consequences, causes of that, is it a symptom of a world in which we trust less and less? Is it a valid fear? Yeah, I mean all of the above, right? And this, by the way, is something that we should do as we talk about this as well too, is kind of project forward in terms of when we think about what it means to provide hospitality as individuals or as a community. Are there takeaways from the biblical witness? Is it helpful to understand the contextual differences? Can we hear, again, like in Matthew 25, Jesus' call to hospitality in a way that is meaningful to us? How do we do that? And it starts with, I think, also just understanding the differences in our cultures and context. One of the things I brought up last week is the way in which hospitality has become othered and siloed. And I don't mean that in a necessarily in a negative way, but insofar as that when you travel, food, lodging, and transportation are provided. outside of individual responsibility, right? Like you're not going to Seattle looking for a stranger's home to stay in. You've already made reservations, theoretically. One of the things that's changed for me in making my trips across the U.S. is I have to make hotel reservations in advance now. Even in like Dickinson, North Dakota, right? I cannot rely on just pulling up. I remember this. This was even 10 years ago. We did a trip in Southern Oregon, and it was myself and Alen and a couple of our friends. We just loaded into a car and we drove down. We went along the southern coast, and wherever we decided to stay that night, we'd look for a hotel and we get a couple of rooms. Can't do it anymore. Everything's booked. And either that or it's cost so much because they charge you an arm and a leg for less without not having a reservation. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
What does a room cost?
150 usually. Yeah. 150. If I book in advance, and again, I get charged extra because I'm carrying 2 dogs with me, because they charge you pet fees, even though it drives me nuts. My pets are wonderfully behaved, and you won't even notice that they were there. You will notice the 4-year-old that, which that's a different story. But I don't have a 4-year-old with me. I'm saying, families with kids probably make more of a mess than my dogs do. Anyways, that's a different rant. But yeah, it's not cheap. The rooms and again, I'm booking usually at least a couple of months in advance. It's anywhere from $150 to $220 for a night. Yeah. One bed? No, for 1 bedroom. Yeah, like a queen bed. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. 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 Different world. Not yeah. Paying, no more paying in cash either. So again, hospitality is siloed. It is separate from us. So, things to think about as we read through these biblical texts is the difference in which, we are less exposed to random or casual strangers, casual foreigners. Go ahead, Wayne.
Well, I was thinking of how you could apply all of that today.
Yes.
And people standing on the sidewalk at the intersections holding up a sign.
Yes.
I heard from some teenagers that they talked to one of the individuals, and basically the guy said, "I just want to be recognized as existing.
Mm.
I don't want to be stared at or glassy-eyed,
Yeah.
but just to be acknowledged. And so if you just wave,
Yeah.
you don't have to give them money, but just acknowledge your presence."
Well, and this is something I was talking about too. Is this is a really important thing, is that when we think about the stranger or the foreigner, so often that is what that category exists in. Again, so when we read Matthew 25, we don't think about offering hospitality to a traveler coming through our town. We think of it in terms of, do we care for this person, right? Do we provide food, shelter, water, whatever it might be? And so that's a really important understanding in terms of, thinking about hospitality, is how much, so because travel has been siloed into, because here's the other thing to think about. People that, we don't even interact with people that are even visiting our cities so much because they're, right? We have entire sections of our city that are, basically fundamentally dedicated towards people that don't live here, right? Which is really obvious to me when Ellen and I go to a restaurant or something that's in downtown, which we rarely go to anymore. When we lived by PSU, we would do it a lot more often, and we're like, oh man, there's so many people that are of different nationalities and ethnicities here, as opposed to South Burlingame. It's a different perspective entirely. But how much we're segregated from foreigners, right? Strangers. And so when we think of the foreigner or the stranger or the one we need to provide hospitality to, so often it's solely the guy on the side of the road or person sleeping in the tent, in the street. Again, this is not about right or wrong. This is understanding the lens through which we read these. The thing that I think is important is that would have all been not necessarily the same category, but everybody would have fit into that category, where when Jesus is talking about, providing food, providing water, welcoming the stranger, I think it kind of spans the spectrum from foreign traveler to immigrant to homeless person, and all in between, if that makes sense.
I think sometimes as we travel across the country and we find small towns, we run into it where you walk into a restaurant.
Oh yeah.
Or he turns and looks at you like,
You start hearing the banjos in the background. Sorry, I don't know if you've seen the movie Deliverance, but go ahead, Jim.
I like our statement that all are welcome.
Yeah.
And also that kind of brings me to the division of politics and religion
Yeah.
and politics.
Oh man.
And it's a whole other realm, but yeah, our statement is all are welcome. What faith tradition, what faith generally what?
Well, I mean, okay, here's a whole different, box of worms here is thinking about the stranger in 2026 U.S. as somebody who has different political opinions than we do, right? And our capability of at least having suspicions, if not recognizing different political opinions, depending on which car you drive and what kind of clothing you're wearing, how our brains automatically do that sorting. I know I struggle with prejudice in that regard all the time. Well, especially with people's driving habits, but that's a different story. But yeah, man, what does it mean to offer hospitality? Understanding that, we talk about all are welcome, but knowing how segregated Sunday morning is, and not even in terms of race, but in terms of politics in the 21st century. Let's look at some Bible stories. We're gonna start at the beginning, so to speak, in that we're gonna go back to Genesis. So I want you to turn to Genesis 18. The oaks of Mamre. And this is, well, don't let me put the cart before the horse. Let's read this first, and then we'll talk about kind of the significance of this whole chapter. Well, then the next two chapters in Genesis. Okay, so we're gonna read the story of the three men appearing to Abram and Sarai at the oaks of Mamre. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. As I read through, pay attention to the setting details, right? What's going on? He looked up and saw three men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." So they said, "Do as you have said." And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make cakes." Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" And he said, "There in the tent." Then one said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I have grown old and my husband is old, shall I be fruitful?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son.' But Sarah denied, saying, 'I did not laugh,' for she was afraid. And he said, 'Yes, you did laugh.'" Yeah, well, that's yeah. So she's solidly through menopause theoretically, I guess. I don't know. Depends. Yeah, and that's kind of an interesting question, isn't it? How do we define old age from a contextual standpoint? In 2026, old is a spectrum. I mean, it's remarkable that we are able to be active and healthy up into our 80s and even 90s. It's not that people didn't live that long in the ancient world. It's just that labor takes its toll on you, and again, just difference in medical care and all that jazz. It was less frequent for you to live that long, but didn't mean you weren't capable of it. But yeah, it's a really kind of interesting question: is how old is old? Yeah, right.
Yeah, when both of my girls were pregnant, they had AGA, advanced maternal age on their charts. Kenna thought it was against medical advice. She was furious. She said,
Against me.
anything and it's advanced maternal age.
How old were they when they had their kid?
35.
Yeah, geriatric mothers. Jeez Louise. And how much is that the norm now? So our neighbors who just had a baby, Saul, I think, is 41, right? So, pushing the odds in terms of health and all. Oh, he's great. So Saul is Persian. She's Iranian. Matt is, I don't know what Matt's, Korak. I think he's Czechoslovakian. Matt has a lot of hair. He's dark-haired. He's got a wonderful mustache. So I joked with him when they showed us pictures of James. I said, "I'm surprised he didn't come out with a mustache." And he said, "Oh, he's got sideburns and back hair." So he's an adorable baby, but he is a dark. He has the hair, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. But having the dark hair, you notice it more than I was a blonde. Both my brother and I were white-haired, Scandinavians when we came out of the womb. So. First of all, any things that you noticed in the story that you were like, oh, that's interesting, Cynthia? Yeah, man, there are so many papers that are written on this because of the almost kind of narrative inconsistency in who Abraham is talking to. The narrative describes 3 men that show up, and here is something that you should kind of notice is. If you're camping and 3 strange men show up at your tent, what's your gut reaction, Yeah, right? And contrast it with the way in which Abraham behaves. What does Abraham do? Well, and not only does he welcome them, he's bowing down, genuflecting almost.
Well, maybe he and Sarah had been out camping or tending the flocks for months and hadn't seen people. And so just to see 3 men going, oh my God, I have someone.
Yeah, humans. Yeah, that is definitely a factor there. One of the things that the text is cluing us into is the dissonance in Abraham's reaction, insofar as that he is treating these people or person, which is it, as royalty. He uses Lord, and it wouldn't be Adonai. It's not a God term, master or equivalent. As he uses a term of respect, indicating a social hierarchy here that is above his, and does it immediately. Okay, this is not a meme. This is the word will come to me later. This is an important part of kind of the hospitality narrative in the ancient world. I think it's in Hebrews where it's. I don't remember I can't quote the verse word for word, but it's something like, be care in offering hospitality to strangers, that you might be offering hospitality to an angel, something along. Everybody remember that verse? I can look it up, but there is a theme, an idea that is present in kind of this call to hospitality, which is that you never know who you might be offering hospitality to. That's an idea that I think is probably continues to be present in our thought. Yes. I'll look. It's from Hebrews 12 or something like that. Yeah. I'll Google it here in a second. That's a question, isn't it? Is there something in how they're dressed, how they're carrying themselves, how they're talking that clues him in? Is he reading some social cues there that we're unfamiliar with? There's a whole bunch of things going on there that just they're not in the text, right?
Well, it says he looked up and saw three men. He'd been sitting there for hours. He wouldn't have seen them coming, but all of a sudden he looks up and they're there.
Yeah. Again, maybe it's the sudden appearance of these men, question mark, man. There's something going on here, okay? Yes, furthering this kind of emphasis on the perceived social hierarchy here. Yeah. And another question here is, eventually, we as the reader have already figured out that this is the divine presence in some form. The question is when does that register for Abraham, right? Is he seeing potentially wealthy people that he recognizes as being lords, masters, or just wealthy people? When does he figure out that this is a divine presence? And does he? Does he? Because seemingly Sarah doesn't figure it out.
So much not written about the meal itself.
Oh yeah.
It would take hours.
Yes. Yes.
You had to build a fire,
You kill the cat, butcher the cat,
cook elements,
Yes.
bread.
Okay, we're gonna talk about this. But for those of you that were wondering, it's Hebrews 13:2. Hebrews 13:2 is and I'm on it in the NSV, not in the King James version. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. Yeah. Okay, let's write down some of the important understandings of hospitality that we can take away from this text. One is that idea specifically is be careful. Warning, you don't know who you're offering hospitality to. And so what does that kind of imply? Like this idea, you might be offering hospitality to angels without. What is the implication here? In terms of what you're supposed to do.
Can't hospitality be reduced to we're all children of God?
Yes.
No matter who you're encountering, this is a child of God.
Well, I would say that's the implication here. All right. That's the interpretive direction of this, right? Is again, you could be entertaining angels, but the implication there is that, whoever it is, yes, I would say that's the Matthew 25 takeaway as well too. But I might be, leading us a little bit too much here. But what's the implication here in terms of our encouragement to offer hospitality? Is it perhaps err on the side of generosity? Yeah. Okay. Oh my gosh. I do too.
But at the same time, I will sit there and engage those people as long as they want to stand there. and actually, if you think about that a little bit, I really do not do them a favor.
Yeah.
Because I'm never going to buy anything.
Yeah. You're just taking up their time.
I am. But they're always kind of fun to talk to. I mean, I'll stand there and listen as long as they talk. Right?
Is there perhaps a little bit of malicious compliance there?
Sometimes they believe I feel I kind of feel guilty.
you had no intention of ever, yeah.
Anyway, but I think part of it is just being decent people.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, these are people that are working hard to try to make a living, and just because I don't want how they're brought up,
Yeah.
they're not okay.
Yeah.
Should be treated with respect.
Well, okay, here we go. I mean, that's a very interesting way of kind of thinking about that idea from a modern context. I mean, this is the other piece too, is like in terms of inviting people into our home, we have very different thresholds than the ancient world did, right? Because by and large, we don't have strangers coming to our door anymore unless they're trying to sell you something. Okay? It's one of the things that I've had to adjust to is growing up in where I did. My friend Adam, who came and visited us 2 weeks ago, he used to just stop by our house at 10 o'clock at night on his way home from work and just pop in and, have a beer with my parents or whatever, because that's what you did in Northeast Michigan. We never locked our doors. My dad probably to this day doesn't know where the keys to the house are, right? And again, we can make that, or we can lament the loss of that all we want, but it's just a different contextual reality, Neighbors watch after neighbors, and again, it's that small town. Of course, that small town hospitality has its inversion as well too, where you're the people that people don't recognize driving in, and then you start hearing the banjos play, and it's a different setting. But in an urban area, especially, deliverance. If you haven't seen it, you're not. You're not. Just Google. Dueling band. Yeah. Okay, it is violent. If you want to understand Genesis 19 and Judges 19, you need to watch Deliverance. Okay, and understanding what a failure of hospitality looks like. In other words, the emphasis on xenophobia okay. We'll talk about that later. But living in an urban or a suburban area, again, when people come to our door, we either know who they are or they're a salesperson. So much of my emotional well-being has been saved by putting up a no solicitor sign and having a barky dog. Because the majority of people have seen the sign and they walk away. And to be fair, our no soliciting sign says, "No soliciting, see dogs for details." And if it's not that, then Macaron barking his head off in the window usually says, "You know what? That's not worth. I'm going to go on to the next house." Which, again, I end up not having the accidental interactions. I don't think that I'm missing a whole lot in that I don't enjoy those conversations. I usually just want to get back to whatever he's doing. But one of the consequences is we don't have casual interactions in the same way in an urban setting. We're suspicious of them, right? Changes our perspective. That's a very important thing to carry with us when we think about differences in these texts. And again, talking about this idea of who might we be having an interaction with. I think of my own personal experience of when I was 19 and I fell asleep at the wheel and my car flipped upside down and ended up in the woods. Ended up in somebody's front yard, and I walked to the door and she wouldn't let me in the house, even though I had blood running down my arms and a cut in my forehead. I smelled like gasoline. That probably didn't help. But I was not welcomed into that home. I was welcomed insofar as that she called the police, which in the end was good. She didn't ignore me, but I was a stranger, right? But yeah, this is an idea that's always present in the context of hospitality in the ancient world, is you don't know who you're offering hospitality to. This is an idea that makes its way into Christianity as well too. I mean, Jesus plays upon this idea, is you welcoming the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, insofar as that that's important on its own right, but it might be Jesus. This is in our thought. It might be Jesus that you're turning away. Okay, second thing. One of the things that we can take away from this is somebody brought it up, is the preparation of the meal itself. Okay, what does he offer? What does Abraham offer to the men? He doesn't offer them meat. He offers a little bit of water and a little bit of bread. Okay, this is another concept that exists in Hebrew or Near Eastern hospitality. You always undersell what you have. you don't brag. You certainly don't brag, okay? And this carries over, oh, you want something to eat? I got a little bit in my fridge or something along those lines. I've been enjoying cooking for our aforementioned neighbors. And part of it is that I'm good at what I do. I make good food, and so it's fun for me to make food that they can not only that they don't have to cook a meal, but it's food that they'll enjoy. But I do this regardless. I undersell what I'm making. I'm not going to go into great lengths at how long it took me and the ingredients that I put into it. I'm just like, you guys want some? I made some beef stew. Is that okay? Last night I made enchiladas. Like, okay, I made the enchilada sauce myself. I did not get it from a can. I can go into great details to describe to you the lengths I went. But this is present in this text. Is Abraham and again, these are people or a person. The text is ambiguous here. That he acknowledges as being of a higher social station. My Lord, my master. He bows down before them, but he does not say, I am going to sacrifice. I'm going to slaughter. I've got a little bit of water and a little bit of bread. This is another idea. But here is the important thing to think about too, is what is entailed in that offering is it isn't just, Abraham doesn't go back to his fridge and come to the door and say, here you go, see you later. What is implied in that offering is company. At Sarah's expense. You might notice that because, again, you thought, how long did it take her to make the bread, kill the cow, cook the calf, all that stuff? The answer is a long time, right? A long time. And so here's the question is, what are the men doing while all this preparation is happening behind the scene? Abraham's offering hospitality. Hospitality is not just food. It's not just food and or shelter. It is community. Okay? The implication is that in offering bread and water, he's also offering his time. I am going to spend time with you. Maybe, again, I don't know that alcohol is part of this, but, there might be cool water or, I don't know, tea or, I don't know, whatever they've got available. But they're sitting there, and as my dad would say, they're just shooting the breeze. Right? For those of you that grew up, I don't mean to segregate us, but I know that growing up in a rural setting, this happens all the time. I mentioned that my friend Adam used to stop by at night, but our house was a revolving door of neighbors just swinging by, and it was usually when they didn't feel like working. It was farmers who had gotten done plowing a field and popped in to see what my dad was up to on the chance that they could, have a glass of water or a soda together and not work for an hour or two. And it goes both ways. It's a bit of a two-edged sword here in terms of how there are many times when my dad was actually wanting to get work done, and one of our neighbors would pop in and okay, all right, well I better, John, man, I can picture these interactions in my mind, but just kind of how that functions. And again, that's something that I miss to a certain extent, are those kind of casual interactions. So again, the implication is you're not handing a Snickers bar through the door or a bottle of water. You are inviting them into relationship or community. Okay.
Another thing that might have been going on at this time is that, they didn't have newspapers and media and stuff and ways to find out about what was going on, in the broader world.
Oh, 100%.
And having travelers coming in and here's Abraham sitting at the infantry, apparently just staring off into space, and all of a sudden, here come these three guys, let's talk to them, see what's going on.
Absolutely.
They, in turn, are providing them with information about this trip,
In fact,
what's going on over in Syria, and, all this kind of thing. And he's probably happy to see them, that way.
in fact, we'll write this one down. I mentioned last week that one of the important things to understand about hospitality in the ancient world is hospitality was their foreign policy, right? So you offered hospitality to the stranger in the hopes and the knowledge of when you needed to bring your wagon of goods to the next town over, they would not rob you and take your stuff, right? That they would reciprocate. Hospitality, when offered, was effectively a legal code. When you offered hospitality, you took on responsibility for the other, okay? Do not minimize this. This is very important, okay? And there's an interesting line between the expectation of hospitality and the reality of it, which is we'll talk about that not next week, the week after. Oh, FYI, I'm not here next week. I'm going to be in Colorado for the weekend, so we won't have adult ed. I'll remind us via email this week. The following week, we'll pick this up again. I'll remind us before we end today. So you take responsibility for it, but News and Information Network, again, before the 24-hour news network, before newspapers, how did we get our information? Word of mouth. Word of mouth. And again, even I don't mean to make this about rural, communities, but this is what I grew up in. This is how you got the news about what was going on in your neighborhood, right? Not what, and it still happens. I mean, this is every phone call with my dad now. God bless him. Is him doing this thing exactly, which is catching me up on all of the things going on in Lear community that I'm not aware of because I live in Portland, right? And again, whether or not that's extremely relevant to me in that moment, it's just what you do. And so yes, when you go stop by John Christopherson's house on the way home from plowing the field over by Elsie Nordby's, you pop in and you shoot the breeze, you gossip a little bit. Oh, did you hear about Al? Yeah, well, he just got out of the hospital, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's what it is. Yes, there's absolutely an expectation that is existing in this context as well, too. So in inviting a stranger into your midst, he or she is also a source of information, right? Information about what's going on in the next town over, what's going on with, oh, did you hear about the war between the Arameans and the, whatever, the Persians that, Yeah, that's totally part of it. It's very, very astute. One of the things that is present in this story, which we're going to see expanded on, well, I should say not necessarily, expanded on, but ever present later as well is, and I already mentioned it, is that obligation, the obligation of the one offering hospitality. And this is where this gets interesting, is in terms of making that choice of whether or not I do it. From a legal understanding, and again, in this ancient world, there's no codified book of laws that sits in some governmental room somewhere that everybody refers to. It is the law that is understood. Okay, and again, not to repeat myself, but so much of it depends on you. If you do this, your neighbors will do the same, right? Like it's foreign policy, it's domestic policy. The obligation to the one you offer hospitality is paramount, insofar as that you take responsibility for their well-being, up to and including if physical danger presents itself to your guest, you are responsible for them, okay? Very important in a couple of weeks as we carry into Genesis 19, Judges 19. We're not necessarily going to spend a lot of time with those texts because we already have to a certain extent. But when we talk about the failure of hospitality, we see the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot welcoming Abraham in, the men of the community wanting to do violence against him, but Lot takes on Abraham's well-being as his responsibility. This is the obligation as the host. But it's a two-way street. If you have been invited in and have been offered hospitality to, you are now bound not to do violence to anybody in the household. This is that teeter-totter. This is the both end of this, is that you have now any grudges, any beef that you might have with the person that you are visiting disappears. It has been set aside for the moment because you are now under the auspices, under the rules of host and hostee, or host and hosted. Okay? You are now under the hospitality obligation. Think about the ways in which this manifests in our world, right? Right now. Well, I actually don't know what's going on right now because it goes back and forth so much, but theoretically, some of our leaders are going to again try to meet with some of Iran's leaders in Pakistan. Pakistan is offering hospitality. They're providing the hosts, and from a diplomatic perspective, they are guaranteeing the safety of those present, right? And they're facilitating, they're doing all this stuff, right? Now, this is a bit of an extreme example, right? Insofar as that you and I don't, we're not super concerned with foreign policy in our offering of hospitality. Maybe sometimes we are. I don't know. Insofar as that, we're not necessarily concerned about this. But I want you to think about what that means and how we do things. So, okay, we're going to wrap up soon. What's a word that we use to describe our space down at the other end of the building? Sanctuary.
That was what I was just gonna say. I'm attending the Senate meetings, and that is part of what they're debating right now is not only our Senate, but Portland itself and the communities being sanctuary versus our, doing.
Yeah. Considering immigration and customs enforcement and how that plays out. Do we understand that the basis for us offering sanctuary is centered in a concept of hospitality? So we, Augustana Lutheran, I know 5 or 6 years ago, went through, had to have been at least 6 years ago because it was during the first Trump administration, went through this scenario wherein they were offering sanctuary to somebody, trying to guarantee due process. Okay, trying to guarantee due process. The basis upon which we offer that is not just we're religious so we're special. Okay? Let's be clear about that. This is one of the misconceptions that we have, is that we think that being Christian should give us, and not just being Christian, but that like being a religious institution gives us special privileges, and some tax benefits. But our theological basis for claiming sanctuary is we have offered hospitality to a stranger, and their well-being is now our responsibility. I would invite you to think about what that means when we offer hospitality on Sunday morning, right? When we, as Jim said, we welcome all, how does this function for us? And again, living in a reality where mass shootings are a common occurrence, and that's certainly an ever-present fear, something that we have talked about as church leadership. That's part of it, but that isn't the whole of it. What does it mean for us to take the well-being of our visitors seriously? As shy Lutherans, Wayne. As shy Lutherans who don't like to talk to people they don't know. Right? And I'm being a little snarky here, and I'm not guilting us here, okay? I think part of being able to offer hospitality well is understanding the limitations of who you are. I love having guests. I like knowing that they're going to come. I have a hard time pivoting when unexpected things happen. I'm still working on this one. Okay, I don't like people showing up unexpectedly. I don't like people calling unexpectedly. If you give me an hour's advance notice, I'm great. But if you just pop in while my brain is somewhere else, it's hard for me. I think this carries through as well to how we offer welcome on Sunday morning, is when things fall outside of our expectations, it can be harder, right? So if somebody doesn't fit into the framework of what we're expecting on a Sunday morning, it can be a little tougher. For some of us, I know we've got some very extroverted people in our midst, which is wonderful because, again, we're the communal offering hospitality, not the individual. So God bless those of you who love meeting new people all the time and are the first to go up and say hi to them. We need you. We need you to compensate for me, right? But again, all of this stuff, how does this factor into what we do in terms of welcoming the stranger into our midst on Sunday morning? What are the implications? What can we learn from the stories that we're reading, all that jazz?
One thing about our church, though, is that every once in a while, one of us, all of
Oh, yeah.
And this is the only church I've ever been to where at the beginning of the church, everybody gets up and goes and says hello to everybody else in the church.
Yeah.
You know, it's just really,
I have to share this. So my friend Adam Wong, and he's Norwegian, not Chinese. It's because they were Vang, and then they moved across. Adam came and visited while he and his wife Tracy and their 3 kids were staying with us. And Adam is a redhead, and he's my age. He's in his 40s. And he was sitting on the pulpit side in the back. I don't know if anybody welcome. But the first thing he said to me when he got home, he said, "You know, it's the first time I've ever showed up for church, and everybody." And the thing that stuck out in his brain was everybody got up, left their pews, and went to say hi to somebody else. Because he's like, Lear Lutheran, where I grew up and where he grew up, it was a smaller church, but normally what you do is you get up and you shake the hands of the people that you can reach from staying in your pew. And if you can't reach them, you might do this, right? And then you sit back down and you go back to business as usual. It's significant that I have to herd you back into your seats before we can start, confession and forgiveness, right?
When I first started coming here, things have changed. Because when I first started coming here, and I came from a very hugging family, the first time I went to do the peace, share the peace, and I tried to hug somebody, it was like, what are you doing?
No touching.
And as it went by, they realized I was not a threat.
Yeah.
And now everybody hugs.
Yeah. Well, and hey, this is another thing to think about, and I won't get into it today, but is also just thinking about that contextualization of how we do this. Insofar as that, and we'll read some stories that kind of hint at this, which is what we understand as hospitality, others might see as threatening, and vice versa. Is how do we work with what we got and understand that what might be welcoming to us might be a little off-putting to others, and so on and so forth. And even in all of that, we also just to embrace that. Also just have to embrace that as a community of faith, we are who we are. We are who we are, and we don't have to be everybody's place. But we need to, as again, as Jim brought up, we need to be prepared to offer the same welcome regardless of who comes through our doors. So. Okay, so I will not be here next week. There is no adult Sunday school in the morning. We'll pick back up the following Sunday, which is the first Sunday in May already. That's terrifying. Okay. And we'll pick back up where we started, or we left off. We're going to look at a couple more texts in the Old Testament. We're going to work our way through. I suspect that we're going to be done with this by the end of May. We'll be moving on to something new in June. So thank you, folks. See you in worship.